Let's get on to our guest because our guest is here. We'll hold on to the Super Rays. We'll read them after. Been a while since he's back on the show, but I'm glad he's back on the show. We could talk a little bit of everything. We could talk about Paxlovid being the Charles Barkley drug of the COVID. It's going to rebound and you're going to get it back. And that's my attempt to do my best, what I call my best Nixonism. Garland Nixon is here. I don't know if you heard this before, if Steve didn't tell you, but I've been saying Garland has this thing where he has these sayings where I'm calling them Nixonisms, right? Like one of my favorite Nixonisms, which I use all the time when people are like, hey, man, I'm getting shadow banned. I'm getting demonetized. And I say, well, hey, you're over the target if you're taking flack. And that's like a Garland thing. And you were on Crosstalk not too long ago, and you had a couple good Nixonisms out there. Thank you so much for joining the show today, Garland. How are you doing? What's been going on, and what are you up to?
I'm doing great, enjoying myself. And, as far as the Nixonisms, I'm like Casey Stengel said when he won all those championships with the New York Yankees. They said, you're a genius. You are such a genius. He said, yes, being a genius is the art of taking credit for all the home runs that someone else hit. So, about 90% of Nixonisms are things that I heard somewhere and thought they were funny and just repeated them.
Well, here's one. Geniuses borrow, only thieves steal. So I'm glad that you're that now we can call you a genius because you're borrowing them. And it's funny because a lot of people don't realize. I think that Casey Stengel got a lot of his stuff from Yogi Berra, right? Or was it the reverse? I don't know who's older, but I know they kind of like they would do those things. Like they said, they give you money, which is just as good as cash, stuff like that all the time. So yeah. Garland, let's get serious over here because I've been waiting to have you on here. I have some questions, and there's a lot of things we can talk about. And by the way, I think your show on Rokfin has been amazing. The show, The Critical Hour, has been so great. I don't know if there's like a new improved Garland or what's going on, but every day I listen to you, it seems like you're just letting it rip, and it's been some amazing stuff. Your tweets have been on fire. So thank you. But let me ask you this question, because I want to address something. For those who don't know out there, Garland used to be a police officer, correct? All right. I don't know if it's important to say sheriff or city officer or what you did. Can you tell us exactly what position you held?
Well, I was a police official, actually. I retired holding the rank of major. I was assistant commander of field ops. So I think what's important in my law enforcement career is that I was a commander of the training division, so I'm intricately familiar with police training. I was the commander of the investigations division, so I'm intricately familiar with police investigations. So a lot of it, which included recruiting, which included internal investigations. So a lot of things that people are concerned with is regarding these police shootings, police violence, and police officers being held accountable fall in the realm of expertise that at the time I didn't know that I was prepping for a media career one day, but those are things that I know pretty well and I understand quite well.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this question because, we talk about the term solidarity, right? Like we're looking for solidarity out there right now. As a nation, we are split. One thing when it comes to policing in the country, a lot of conservatives tend to back the blue. They really do. They elevate, cops in this country. In fact, Fiorella can tell you when we were at the Capitol on January 6th, I don't think it's funny, but it was really kind of like, it was eye-opening to see some of these conservatives Trumpers go, come on, Blue, we fought for you, as they were getting tear gassed. Like they couldn't believe that the cops would do it to them, right? And we've always said that at the end of the day, the police officers, they serve power. They serve the 1%. That's just the way it is. I'm not going to say that I'm not one of those anti-police people. You know what I'm saying? I believe defund the police was a wrong message. I believe it should have been reimagine the police or demilitarize the police or something, that doesn't say just get rid of the police, because we knew it would never kind of go over. But the thing I get criticized a lot for is always pointing out the class issue over the race issue, right? And a lot of leftists that are people of color say that until there is recognition that a black person's life is way more at risk than a white person when they go out there, even though I say, all our lives are at risk. Obviously, we do have some privileges and black people's lives are more at risk. But at the end of the day, the security state wants us all dead. They don't care, what are my responsibilities as a white man as far as acknowledging the situation that goes at hand? Do we need to have some form of recognition from white people in this country towards black people whose lives are at risk before we move forward? Or should we understand that there's a class issue here that at the end of the day, until we get rid of this 1%, nothing's going to change?
One of the things I think this is important is to understand that the issue of class and race in America are inextricably linked. So you're not wrong to say it's a class issue. I always talk about the issue of class from a perspective of solutions, because I do not believe that America currently, as it is culturally, will act in a way to say we're going to address the issues of race that have created an environment where a particular race of people but have been denied some basic rights, and that has held them back economically, particularly for many, many years. I don't think for the whole of our country's existence. So I don't think that America is ready at this time to accept and address that particular issue. That being said, I think, so the question is, if America is not culturally ready to say, okay, we created this issue as a country and we need to resolve it as a country and make a certain group whole, then what are our options? And see, that's important. What are our options? It's easy to say Black people should get this, that, or this is the way we should address this or whatever. Is that a legitimate option? Right now, I think the most legitimate option, the most effective way and the quickest way to address the issue of race, the issues of race that Black people are dealing with, would be through economic class. That's something, God knows if you could even get any of that stuff through, but because most Black people fall in working class, working poor, and poor, if you address the issues of the working class, the working poor, and poor, you will address the issues of the economic class that most Black people fall into. And you won't have to just say, we're making Black people whole because they've been screwed and held back for the last 400 years, which may be true. But realistically, can you go to enough of America and say this is an issue and get them to say yes? I don't think so. So that's what it becomes to me. What are our legitimate options that we have? Not only that, that will in fact make America better. So you can do things to address the issues of Black America and without getting the pushback as much so from the people who would be anti-racial justice. And you could also make America a better place because those issues such as, free community college, you're going to help a lot of Black folks. A lot of Black folks go to community college because they can't afford to go to major, to a 4-year school or a state school. And some don't go at all because they can't afford it. So I'm with you on that. And I think regardless of how we express it, it is an effective way to address racism and the history of racism. And that's what's important.
Fam, can I do a follow-up real quick? Because I want to stay really quick on the subject here and stuff. Okay, well, here's the solution, Garland. We come together realizing that, because this is something I have a hard time, I don't want to say a hard time dealing with when I talk to people. I believe there's a group of elitists out there. I believe it's the 1% and the rest of us, the oligarchs and the rest of us. That is the huge divide of what's going on right now. So my solution would be to let's take care of these oligarchs, get rid of them, and then get in a room and decide what's best for us. Because I think there is sometimes a looking at our neighbor going, as white people, you need to realize the oppression that we go through. And then a lot of white people go, okay, but what can we really do to fix the situation when it's always the elites making these decisions? They're the ones who've always prospered. And I'm not saying that, white people haven't played into racial, moments throughout our history and take advantage of themselves. I mean, they have had much more better opportunities. But at the end of the day, isn't it the elites who are making the rules that say, let me keep my population divided amongst each other so that we can run off with all the money and the resources?
So we've got a couple of tough things we're dealing with here. I'm glad you brought that up because that brings in some really significant issues. Number one, there's the issue of these oligarchs, and we could name some of them right off, Bezos and Gates and the Koch brothers, blah, blah, blah. But is the problem truly at this point the oligarchs, or is the problem the system that funnels all of the money to the top 1% and creates oligarchs and makes the oligarchs that we have even more powerful? And is there a delineation between the two? Because of course, as you know, if you're one of the oligarchs, you can now fund members of Congress and you can buy out the political system so that it helps you even more. So I think I don't have the answer to that, to be quite honest to you. But I do think we have to look at what you're saying, the system of oligarchs and the system that produces oligarchs and continues to fund everything towards the top 1%. You know, a perfect example of that to me is after 2008, when we were told, yes, the GDP is going up, the gross domestic product is going up, therefore we're having a recovery. But when you looked at the numbers, you found that the banks were taking people's homes, they were writing off the loans, reselling the homes, renting them out, whatever, and making a profit. And that was then counted as part of the gross domestic product. And that's one of the metrics that they use to say that we were in a recovery, when in fact, the banks were simply making even more money off of the economic destruction of 2008. So we're looking at a system that oppresses people, that preys economically on the working class, the working class, the working poor, and the poor, and then uses that oppression to say, no, everybody's doing fine. It looks like the tides are rising and the ships are on their way up again. So it's those oligarchs. All I'll say is, I'll leave by saying this. I'm with you as long as we don't get too focused on the oligarchs and we don't get to the point where we just get caught up demonizing the oligarchs so much that we forget about this system that produces oligarchs in a manner that if every one of them drop dead tomorrow, they'll be replaced by a new crop, because this is what this system creates.
Thank you.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think sometimes, especially, you know, and I don't like to stereotype, but I do see like some people who are on the right focus on the particular people, and it's these people, like if you eliminate them, yeah, like 100%. It's like, yeah, but you can get rid of all those people and they will be replaced by somebody else, because power corrupts and the system that we're set in is set up to be this centralized power form. And so you're just going to have an endless replacement of people, even if you eliminate every single one of these oligarchs. I 100% agree on that. And just shifting over to this particular case, right? Jayland Walker, he died from over 60 bullet wounds. And the situation with him was that there was the juxtaposition of the recent shootings that have been happening all over July 4th, et cetera, and in Texas. And they always say, okay, well, here's this white guy, this shooter, or this this white presenting person, and this is a mass shooter, and they get walked out, they get arrested. Why does the black guy always constantly get shot down and then 60 bullets? And we'll talk about the 60 bullet situation. But then a white man in West Virginia was also killed in a very similar fashion. Now, the immediate reaction was, yeah, but if he were black, he would have been shot a lot quicker. They tried to reason with him. He kept walking around. He wasn't listening. So again, so we're back at the same thing. Is it fair though? Because how do you get past that? If, and I can ask you this question in particular, people are emotional creatures. They when they see something happen, and now because of cell phones and because of independent media and because of everything, we're seeing these shootings happen. I mean, it just happened in New York today, I think, where there was a kid with a Nerf gun, and they shot him, and the New York police shot him and killed him. So you keep seeing this, and so people are going to react emotionally and say, okay, well, I'm seeing more black people get killed. I'm seeing this. Why is nobody going to listen to that part? How can you just skip that and just say, well, this is about class? And I agree with you. I understand that it is about class, but how are you going to get those people on board in terms of really trying to ignore this, not ignore, but kind of put it aside when they continuously see this being very lopsided against a certain population.
Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying it's only about class. What I'm actually saying is class, race and economic class are inextricably linked, right? That's not saying that that's either or. That's saying that they're linked in a manner, particularly in the United States, because more Black people tend to be in the lower economic classes for a variety of reasons. Here's the thing. Let me add something to you that I always add, because you'll have people say cops are racist, cops are this, cops are that. Again, we get to individuals, bad apples, individuals. It's not the system. Keep in mind something, that when this happens, and we see this time and time again, the cop shoots some Black guy 57 times, and unarmed guy or whatever. And you say, okay, that's the cops. And then they go to court. And then a jury, none of whom are cops, but they are Americans, all vote to let this guy off. You remember the guy, what was his name? Slater and Scott in South Carolina, where the officer shot the guy in the back 5 times on video and then planted evidence on the guy. All on video, completely violated the law. They went to trial, and the jury, they had a hung jury. And so after the first one, after the hung jury, the second time he pled guilty and they gave him X amount of years, whatever the case may be. But my point is, we can't just get caught up in saying it's the police and they're all a bunch of racists. The truth of the fact of the matter is we're dealing with an American problem. That yes, the cops are going to do it. And then when they go to court, a bunch of jurors are going to let them go. Well, are the cops somehow separate from the jurors? Are their thoughts? No. What it reflects is the view of America towards our class system, our caste system, and the people who are in the lower classes and the lower castes are viewed as a danger, are viewed as a problem, and therefore the people in the upper classes don't want the people in the lower classes to feel that they have I guess I'll use a legal term, the standing oftentimes. It's almost a Dred Scott thing. It's almost like to say, we don't want these people to feel that they have the standing, legal or cultural or social, to push back against the police or to push back against the white society. I think that's really part of it. I think part of it is people looking at this saying, if we allow Blacks or Hispanics or whoever to come to court and to be, to get a fair shot, then that means they have the standing to push back against the system. And that kind of challenges our caste system, as a whole. So we'd rather just say, okay, a Black person got shot, right, wrong, or indifference. Whoever, the police are always going to be held as right, because that's something that maintains our caste system, our class system. And maybe that's a little complicated, but it seems to make sense to me.
Okay. Furthermore, on this case, I want to ask you a little bit more about a technicality. Did you have a follow-up, fam, or is that okay?
No. Yeah, no. Okay. Go ahead.
Is it true that some police departments train their officers to empty their clips when firing? Because, that was a situation. We saw that, we saw what happened with Jalen Walker, right? They said he fired out of the car. The white kid in West Virginia, I'm so sorry, I don't have his name with me. He had a gun. He was threatening to kill himself. And then all of a sudden, they just unleashed in both situations. And then somebody said, and I don't know if this is true, and this is why I said I got to get Garland on. I probably could have just, texted you and get an answer. But is it true that police departments train their officers to empty their weapon? And then why?
Okay, I can say this. In 27 years as a police officer, and many of those years I was in charge of our training academy, which included, and our training division, which included firearms training for all of our officers. I have never known of an instance where officers were specifically trained to empty their clip. Now, so let me tell you a little bit about firearms training when you go to the range. You do various things. For instance, we'll say, all right, we're going to be at 15 yards. When I blow the whistle, and we'll give instructions. You'll go up, you'll shoot twice, and then you'll cover the target, right? You'll go up and you're only going to have 3 rounds in your magazine. You're going to fire 3 rounds, and then you're going to pretend that one arm has been hit, and you're going to have to change out and put another magazine with only using one hand. So what I can say is, when you're on the range, you do a variety of different scenarios. Pretending it's real life. What would happen if you were shooting and you got hit in one arm? What would happen if you ran out? What would happen if you only had 2 rounds? Shoot 2 and cover, things of that nature. So within the course of fire, as they would call it, on a range, you're going to do all different kinds of things, including, all right, come up and fire all your rounds, reload, fire again. But that's going to be one of the course of fires. Now at 15 yards, fire 2, cover. On the whistle, fire 2 more, cover the target. On the whistle, fire 2 more. So can I technically say, if one of the courses of fire is fire all your rounds, are you being trained to fire all your rounds? But because the courses of fire vary so much, I wouldn't say that I know of an instance anywhere where people were specifically trained. If you pull that gun, fire till it's empty. In fact, if I were training, that wouldn't make sense, because you're out of, you fire all your rounds, and some other body comes up and starts shooting at you again, you're out of rounds. I taught conservation of fire, and a lot of people teach that. Only fire, and the military does too. Only fire the number of rounds that you need to fire at a given time. So I think that's, in my opinion, from what I've seen, I think that's a belief that's kind of going around on the street. But in law enforcement, I've never seen it, and I'm not going to say it hasn't happened, but I've never seen it or seen an instance specifically of that or anything close.
Thank you.
So why would someone do that then? Like, why would they unleash 60 bullets on one dude? Like, what is the justification?
Good question.
Yeah.
A good question. Keep in mind something. There are 2 things you're talking about when you talk about an interaction with a law enforcement officer. There's training, and then there's human emotion. As an example, one of the things that happened during my career was we came upon a time when the issue of police chases and a lot of studies of police chases. And what they found basically was, what happened now, most police departments, almost all of them say, you don't chase people you're not allowed to chase people for common traffic violations. Why? Because most police chases end in an accident, right? And so, the proverbial little old lady with tennis shoes is walking across there, and you're chasing some guy for running a stop sign, blop right over, she's dead. You don't want that to happen. The other thing they found was, at the end of police chases, officers tend to be hyped up and they freak out and they fire and they go crazy and they do all kinds of things because of adrenaline flying. They're chasing somebody, the adrenaline is going through the roof. So they're not logical, they're not reasonable, they're not necessarily even responding to their training because they're all freaked out. So I think one of the other things that you have to take into account is that when you have officers involved in police chases or all of these high emotional things, they're completely hyped up on adrenaline. That's why it's important in training to try to avoid situations and to try to stop situations where officers are chasing people and everything's gone to hell and everybody's all freaked out, because all the training and everything goes out the window and it just becomes a person who's freaked out losing it.
And just as a follow-up, Garland, on that note, since we're on there already, you don't believe in getting rid, I think if I remember correctly, in defunding the police, getting rid of them. There is an abolitionist movement that a lot of the left is pushing, to try to get rid of policing, because they say it's just, the system is corrupt. So thereby policing under the system is going to be corrupt. So it needs to go. I'm of the belief that the system is corrupt, so any sort of what entity you get is going to be corrupt anyway. So we need to attack the system as a whole. But what is then, in your opinion, is there an ability to reform the police under the system? Is there something that could be done to at least help the situation as it is, even if we are still living in this system?
So let me say this. I'm one not to separate parts of a system. So, and I've used this particular parable, as it were, before, right? A guy goes out to the bar and he goes in the bar and he gets in a fight with some guy in a bar. Then he comes out of the bar and he's driving home and he stops at a red light, gets in an argument at a red light. Some guy gets out, gets in a road rage fight. Then he comes home. When he gets home, you know what he's probably going to do? Beat the hell out of his wife and kids or whoever his domestic others are. Why? Because this is a violent person who has a violent nature. When I look at the United States and I say, and I say to this, people who are activists who say, we're going to work on this police thing and we're going to stop. And I say, if you think that the United States is going to go around the world, blowing things up, killing people, being gangsters, stealing people's resources, threatening people, starting wars, but at home, for some reason, they're going to be doves. Well, the law enforcement at home, they're going to be nothing like the guys over there in Afghanistan breaking through doors, machine gunning entire families. Then you don't understand the connection that this is a violent system. It only makes sense. Go ask the Palestinians. Go ask somebody who's had U.S. soldiers busting their doors down, machine gunning their families, if they think that there's a way to change the same system at home. The bottom line is Malcolm X referred to Black communities as internal colonies, right? We are the Palestinians of the United States. So I believe that our foreign policy and our and even let me add this, even look at what's happened when it comes to weapons, right? Where more weapons, more and more pump more weapons into the military, more weapons to these countries, give them more powerful weapons, et cetera. And look at police, exactly the same thing. So now the police departments are literally armed by the same weapons manufacturers, tanks and MP5s and things like that are sending this stuff overseas. If you look, I remember when I was a cop and I had on like a white shirt and a black tie, or olive shirt and a black tie, and you look like in Corafam shiny shoes when we started. Now you go look at a cop and they don't look any different from the first, airborne division guy who's dropping out of a plane somewhere. And they are the same guy because when they got back from Afghanistan, they hired him as a cop because that's what they wanted. Let me tell you one more quick story. True story. When I used to work, I actually worked for the ACLU at one point. And I remember talking to a guy who told me that I'm in a particular city. He was tasked with coming up with an early warning system, so that if you saw an officer that got in a lot of trouble, right, before he killed anybody or did anything, you could bring the person in there, you could retrain him, you can deal with that, and maybe even fire the person if they didn't stop getting in trouble and complaints and things like that, right? So it was an early warning system. Find the trouble officers, deal with it early. And he said it was working fantastic, right? And the city got rid of him. And he said, why? And they said, quote, "You're turning my lions into lambs." So this city wanted officers that they saw as aggressive out there fighting the good fight. So that's what we're looking at. Can you blame the individual officers? There was an environment being created where they wanted them to be violent and aggressive. And again, you bring them back here from some fight and they're violent and aggressive. Hooray! Go out there and beat the public.
Yeah. And I get PTSD, half of them. And it's like, oh, we got to hire a veteran. And man, it goes on. True or false? It would be a great reform if internal affairs were no longer allowed to investigate the police officers when a situation happens. Instead, having a city board of citizens go ahead and make decisions on how the reform should happen at their police station. In other words, they should no longer be able to investigate themselves. It's almost like Israel with this reporter right now. Oh, we'll do an investigation. Like, no, thank you. I don't think we need your investigation. Go right ahead, Garland.
A couple of things here. I have seen, the police review boards and things like that, and I haven't seen them work. And there are a couple of reasons. Number one, because you don't have people, oftentimes they're not attorneys, they don't have a background in the law, they don't understand police procedures, things of that nature. So that creates an opening for the police department. So you have a bunch of citizens and they're trying to review a shooting of brutality, whatever the case may be, but they don't understand the policies and things of that nature. So then the police department says, oh, don't worry, we'll help you out. We'll send you in some advisors to help interpret that stuff. The advisors come in, and when they talk to them or whoever it is to interpret the policies or whatever, they do it in a way that's beneficial to the officer who has been accused of whatever. So the bottom line is they use the lack of knowledge of the details for these particular citizens to their advantage to help get the officer off if he did something, whether he did something or not. So here's what I think, and this is what I've advocated for. I believe, particularly regarding issues of brutality, violence, physical violence, things of that nature, abuse, there should be, outside of police departments, there should be, whether it's under the Attorney General's office or the state, whether it's federal, whatever the case may be, there should be a separate legal entity that specifically investigates these police departments, police incidents of violence, brutality, excessive force, things of that nature, right? And that group cannot include any retired police officers. They should be some attorneys, there should be professionals, et cetera, like that. But I think, and there should be some level of watchdogs over that, some people over that keeps an eye on what they're doing. There should be a lot of transparency with what they're doing, their investigations. Bottom line is this, I'm with you in that the investigations of excessive force and use and above has to come out of the police department, has to come out of the internal investigations, and it has to we have to create an entity outside of police departments. Because as we know, if you remember in the Freddie Gray thing in Baltimore, which I was working for the ACLU when that all went down, and I was part of that, Marilyn Mosby said then, she said, the Baltimore City Internal Investigation is working as part of the defense team. And that is a fact. And that's what's going to happen every single time internal investigations are going to look at it and they're like, well, there, but for the grace of God, go I. So we got to make sure this guy walks. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to be part of the defense team. So I'm with you. Something has to be done. We can talk about the details, but I think the important thing is these investigations have to come out of police departments and into a separate entity that doesn't have retired police officers, because they'll say, sure, we've got this separate entity that's going to be the investigations. But retired police officers are the ones that have the expertise. So we better go with all retired police officers. And of course, you're going to get the same thing. It's just a different kind of blue, no matter who, shall we say. Gotcha.
Thank you, Garland. Fee?
Shifting to the talk about, the greater police force, which is the national security state apparatus, right? And so recently, the former CIA engineer was convicted of espionage over Vault 7 WikiLeaks release. And so this is Schulte. He was convicted for essentially just allowing the knowledge to get out there. And of course, he still claims he was framed. And it's just basically the CIA, of course, infringing upon the rights of privacy of Americans, everything from, your compute, what's on your computer, to your iPhone or your Android or whatever it is. And the fact is, we have Julian Assange, the case where, of course, they approved his extradition. And we have this whole situation happening, this attack on journalism. We're all being censored. We're all being demonetized. We're being shadow banned. We all talk about this all the time. Where are we at with this situation now? Because it seems like it's getting worse. Now you're convicting. You're trying to convict and give 175 years to a journalist for publishing, and now you're going after a bunch of whistleblowers. Where does this leave us in terms of the system? Because I'm of the belief that if we don't tackle the greater apparatus, everything else is just going to continue.
Yeah, I think we're at an interesting point, because what I see as the issue at hand is the system does not want the truth about who they are to be conveyed to their constituents, to the citizens. Why? Because at the end of an empire, as an empire crumbles, it goes from seeing all of these enemies, on the outside, to seeing the problem being the potential uprisings at home. That's what our system's scared to death of right now. That's what they are concerned about. They are afraid of us. They're not stupid. They understand that they're not meeting our even minimum needs. And we understand as they do, as do they, that's not their job anymore. That we are no longer their constituents,
Right.
that power has been consolidated into a tiny group of people, and we ain't part of that club. So now that we have a system with the illusion of democracy, and some Americans and some people still think there's some level of democracy, they're going to get frustrated and angry because they're going to say, we put you in office and you're supposed to be standing up for us. And when we figure out that, as the more people figure out that they're not, the angrier people will get. So this is about acting to prevent uprisings at home. This is about acting to keep people asleep, to keep people within the false parameters of a democracy that no longer exists, if it ever really did.
You know, there were some people back in the days when people who do independent news, I believe you just saw one of the guys from the Duran, right?
Yeah, Alexander, of course.
Okay, the Cristofaro guy, Alexander.
Yes.
Alex, yeah, okay. He once said, and me and Fam laughed about this, that when, you know, Epstein was good, this was coming to the forefront. He goes, this is so important. This is like the history of everything right now is on the line right now. This is one of the biggest things because it does show clearly that there's a ruling class that are controlling everything, playing by a different set of rules than all of us. That everything we've been taught, you know, is just a facade. There really is no government. It doesn't have any choices. Nancy Pelosi might not be she might be on paper the most powerful person in our government, but really she takes her orders from those up above, those from the World Economic Forum and all these other places and whatnot. With Joshua Schulte, he exposed all these tools that the CIA are using, like they're listening on the phone and smart TVs and this whole 9 yards. To me, it almost has the same kind of significance. Like, wow, he is really proving that, you know, us tinfoil hatters who said they had all this stuff are really not having tinfoil hats on. We just recognize it early. How dangerous, how bad are these tools that they're using that the intelligence apparatus has at their disposal? How dangerous are they?
Well, they're dangerous in a number of ways, but let me put one obvious way. There's no chance of democracy anymore. It ends democracy. Why is that? Look, every person, me, you, anybody we know, you're talking on the phone to people or you're emailing something, and you may email or say something that if you wouldn't want everybody to hear that. I mean, it may be the language you use. It may be, you know, the colorful, illusions you use. It may be something, right? It may be whatever the case may be. But because the national security state has all that stuff, anybody that runs, they can take them out. They can take anybody out. Anybody that runs, they can say, this person sent an email back and so-and-so saying this about trans people, or it could be interpreted about trans people. Oh, Garland said this about a pretty girl. Oh, whatever. Fiorella said, I hate this person, or whatever the case may be. They can find something. So one of the things I think that's really horrible about all of the the bugging of all of our systems is that it gives them the power to decide who's able to rise up in the political system and who's not. And people know it. So now you have people that, like somebody that may be gay, right? Who may be afraid, and this is legitimate. There are people who are gay who are afraid that if that becomes too public, that it could hurt them politically. It's unfortunate that that's the society we live in, but there's people who have that legitimate fear. We could probably think of a few people right off the bat who may be in Congress or famous people who most people know they're gay, but they don't make a big deal out of it.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Did I say something?
But so we could go on and on. But the point being that they got all this stuff on everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody. And so they kind of got everybody at their, think about this. And this is important, the whole Hunter Biden thing. We found out that the FBI had that a year before it came out and anybody admitted it. They had it when Donald Trump was being, when they were going after Trump for the whole Ukraine phone call and all that stuff. And he was saying the Ukrainians should investigate Biden. The FBI had the hard drive, and they knew that what Trump was accusing Biden of, Biden's people were doing even worse, but they held it, right? Why? Because that way they could get Biden and whoever was involved to do whatever they want. So the big ugly part of it is not just that they're keeping all of our stuff, which is bad enough, but that is something they can and do use to manipulate what once may have been some form of democracy. That's what really freaks me out.
Fam, anything else?
Yeah, well, so a lot of people are leaving the States, right? Like, I don't know if you've noticed, Garland, but a lot of journalists are leaving the States because they no longer feel safe in the United States. If you're doing any sort of adversarial journalism or even just being on YouTube, everybody's getting taken down, everybody's getting strikes. In a way, they're sanctioning us for telling the truth, right? And so people are going into other countries like Russia, like, you know, the Middle East and et cetera. And they're trying to stay away from the fact that the State Department might, you know, come after somebody. What is happening with Assange is obviously very present in a lot of what we do for obvious reasons. But how do you protect whistleblowers if this is happening? Like, how do you even now begin to fight this crackdown that we're seeing, this censorship, the mass surveillance? At this rate, it seems like all the mechanisms that we were using, whether it was YouTube, whether it's streaming or going even on Sputnik or on RT. I mean, those channels are largely shut down in the United States. How do you provide any sort of protection? Is it wise to tell people to leave the United States? Are we at that moment where this is a solution, or is there just, I guess people should just continue speaking until they can't anymore, right? Is there even a solution? This is a hefty question here.
Right. Well, a couple of things. I think back, you know, as many people know, my mentor was Paul Robeson Jr. And we talked often about his father. And his father did what he did because it's what he believed in and what he stood for. And at some points, you know, he had his passport taken and, you know, lots and lots of money was lost from, you know, his career and things of that nature. But he didn't stop. Even when he was blacklisted, he didn't stop performing. He didn't stop, you know, doing the things that he did because that's what he believed in. I think ultimately, it comes down to people doing what they do because that's what they believe in. And, you know, that's me. You know, right now, look, here's an example. Right now, you know, I have a show on KPFK in Los Angeles. So I don't know, I'll be pretty straightforward. I don't care. I talk about it. So I do a show. After my show, there's a guy, Brad Friedman or something, right? He comes on and says, Garland Nixon's a Russian bot, a Russian paid, Russian troll. He should not be on there, blah, 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 right? And people ask me, how do you feel about that? And I'm like, it makes perfect sense to me. I think that's what should happen. I say, look, if somebody was around in 1938 and they were like in Germany saying, you know, I think perhaps we should be a little nicer to the Jews, it would only make sense that 100 people would stand up and say, my God, he's a madman. So in a place where freedom and liberty, those kind of things have deteriorated to the point where they are, it only makes sense that if you try to tell the truth, if you try to challenge power, that there'll be 100 people standing up saying, how dare you challenge power? So that's the way I see it. To me, it makes it even more important to do it. It makes it more important to stand up for what you believe in and say what you have to say. When people are pushing back, it tells you, to me, you're doing the right thing. And now, there are people who leave the country. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, you know, if you want to go to another country, work in other countries, history tells us, I mean, Paul Robeson, again, he lived in the Soviet Union. For years, he lived in England. A lot of Black activists back in the, say, 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s would go to France, where it wasn't as racist against Black Americans as it, you know, and maybe if you're Moroccan and Algerian, not so great. But if you were a Black American, you could get away with more. So I understand either way, it's what an individual has to do. Some people need a little more elbow room. But, you know, I'm just, keep pushing and doing what you're doing.
It's a shame about Brad Friedman because he's an election guy, knows a lot, but yet he's just got TDS and it really just, it's knocked him so off whack, and you know, like he's lost a lot of followers and whatnot. So that's crazy. The last thing I have to ask, Garland, because I want to get your opinion today, because I brought you on. Obviously, we brought you on. I wanted to talk about policing, and I wanted to ask, you know, as a white man, what my responsibility is. And then I see you tweeting today, and Mr. Michael Langley, who's been appointed as the Marine commander in Africa, you said he's another Uncle Tom. Just doing stuff, pushing colonialism. And I thought it was great, but I did have a chuckle. Why don't you give us a little insight to what you see coming as far as military operations in Africa when it comes to the United States. Because even in the situation when it came to Somalia, at the very end, Donald Trump had brought some troops back home. Joe Biden put them back right in when he got back in. So, I mean, Africa is one of those things. There's a lot of rare minerals and all these other things that we need, cobalt, well, at least the elites need for the fourth industrial revolution. So just give us a quick little synopsis of what you feel is coming in Africa, because a lot of people are not paying attention to it.
So what's going on here is, to me right now in particular, Africa is an extension of the U.S. empire crumbling, the U.S. empire seeing Russia and China and Iran and even Turkey seeing some other countries growing and trying to figure out not how, because if you think about it, you know, when I was in like eighth grade, I played basketball and I wasn't very good. And I wanted to play on the team in ninth grade. So what did I do? I practiced all summer. I got better. I made the team in ninth grade, right? But the other option would have been I could have got a pipe and Tanya Harding, the rest of the players, bashed all of their knees in. And great, now I'm starter because we got nobody else, right? Well, that's kind of what the U.S. empire is doing right now. It's like, hey, you know, technologically, economically speaking, Russia and China are growing. We're not doing so well. We got to drag them down. That's what Africa is about. That's what, and I think it's intentional to put a Black person in charge of AFRICOM to fight the argument that it's racist. Well, it couldn't be possibly be racist. And why we've got a Black person in charge of that? So what they're trying to do is thwart any democratic ideals and independence in Africa, so that the Africans can look at an offer from the Russians, economic options from the Russians, from the Chinese, from the Americans, from whoever, and say, we want to select the one that works best for our economic interests. They're trying that's what AFRICOM's all about right now. It's about that. It's also about controlling trade routes, you know, the Red Sea. Look at what's happening, the Straits of Hormuz and the Red Sea, what's happening on both sides of Saudi Arabia, the way they send their money, send their oil out to the main shipping channels. So to me, Africa is all about this war against Russia and China, this worldwide futile attempt by the United States to stop Russia and China, which means they have to thwart independence, economic and democratic independence in Africa. And all it's doing is it's pushing these countries further away. I'll end by this. When I see the United States doing, it's the old child with the bunny, story, where someone gives the little girl a bunny and she gets in the car and she hugs the bunny. She loves the bunny and she squeezes the bunny so hard that by the time they get home, the bunny's dead. She loved it so much, she squeezed it to death and killed it, right? The US is trying so hard to hold on to this unipolar moment to world hegemony, to being heads and shoulders above China and Russia. They're squeezing this so hard around the world that they're pushing countries away. They're pushing the African countries, the Latin American countries away. They're squeezing this need to hold on to power and unipolarity so hard that they're killing it faster than it would have normally died.
You know, what a great way to end the segment, right, fam? With the two Nixonisms, right? He said, don't get Tanya Harding. Don't get Tanya Harding. Watch, you know what I'm saying? And then the bunny is getting squeezed. And I think a lot of people do have to pay attention to what's going on in Africa. And I appreciate your insight. In Djibouti, I believe that is one area where China has a base. And China doesn't have many bases outside of its own territory. So there's a lot to pay attention.
One in Djibouti.
In Djibouti. And why do they have that base in Djibouti? That's a very important question. That's something we have to pay attention to. Anyways, fam, you got anything else for Garland?
No. Thank you, Garland. I mean, the countries are coming together too, because they're bringing, the United States is bringing other countries together against them, which is what's funny that's happening. But thank you, Garland, for coming on and having this discussion with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. If I could make one more comment.
Of course.
Just comment on, before I came on, you guys were talking about the discussion about Vladimir Putin, how the CIA is saying, unfortunately he's doing fine, and there's all this discussion about Putin, not Russia. And my thought on that was, that's part of creating a narrative. Because to talk about the issue of Ukraine and what's going on there, it is important to understand the history of it. So you understand the historical dynamics that created this, right? However, if we only talk about Vladimir Putin, there's no need to talk about history. It's just a person on a given day woke up on the wrong side of the bed and said, I'm an evil guy. I think I'll attack this country. Are there any historical reasons? No, none whatsoever. It's just that I'm an evil guy. That's what I'm doing. So with foreign policy, we have to create, what do we know about Syria? There's no such thing as Syria. There's Assad, and he's evil. What about Venezuela? There's Maduro, and he's evil. So what we do is we create this simplistic Marvel Comics style scenario where people see a worldwide evil villain, Lex Luthor-esque villain, who only acts because they're evil. And that way you can keep Americans from looking into the history so they can see this thing through a historical context. And through that context, through that lens, you'll be able to see where the U.S., where NATO, and where our policies fit into this outcome.
That's awesome. That is so awesome.
100% true.
He's been, Garland, you've been to Venezuela before. You should consider coming to Brazil with us to see the election this year. We're going to go to Brazil and check that out. You're more than welcome to come do that little.
Let me know. I'd love to. Send me some info when you're going.
Definitely. We will do that, Garland. Thank you so much for coming on and providing so much clarity. I really do appreciate it, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Garland.
Oh, Garland Nixon is the man. Love that guy.
Yeah. I mean, that last point was so true. This is why Americans love Hollywood.
Yeah. They got to create a villain that way. Make it so
you got this 007 movies, the Bourne Identity or Jason Bourne movies, all that shit.
Yeah.